Jeff Brown was able to go from this
هذه هذه مجلة.
Magella. Okay, Magella.
to this.
أنا مجنون. أنا كنت بركب العجلة في الشارع. الشارع اسمه الرمسيس.
In exactly 1 year in which he spent 800 hours acquiring Arabic, which is interesting because the FSI actually states that one needs 2200 hours to reach an S3 level, which is speaking 3. And this is roughly the equivalent of the B2 or C1 level, which is pretty impressive. Now, Jeff is a Spanish teacher who is very familiar with the research on how people acquire languages, which I did explain in the previous video. So this is basically a follow-up on that, but I will briefly explain it. So there's a difference between learning a language, which is basically knowing about the language, usually through grammar and stuff, and there's acquiring a language, which is what you do unconsciously, what everyone does when they're children. You don't know about the rules, you just have a feel for correctness. And so the conclusion is that the only way to acquire language is to understand the message that is directed at us through comprehensible input. So Jeff's only goal was to get 800 hours in of comprehensible input. First, he was going to spend 300 hours with natives in exchanges, doing language exchanges, and then an additional 500 hours in the country where the native language is spoken and where he can acquire more Arabic, listening to native speakers even more. Jeff made a guide about everything that he did and what he would recommend if anyone were to do this as well. And I read that document, and here's basically his method, explained all the activities that he did. So first of all, he recommends doing 8 hours a week of comprehensible input, of meeting up with natives and doing language exchange. So he had to find people first. He says you can look for colleagues, friends, family, whatever. Let's say 8 hours a week. So maybe 2 hours per session, 4 people a week. That's 8 hours a week. Spent with your language parent. Once you found your language parent or your tutor, then you're going to do some activities in your exchange. Now, all the activities that Jeff did revolve around this idea of comprehensible input, him not talking at all, well, mostly the native speaker talking to him about 90%, and he would only speak for only 10%. So at first you need something to talk about, and that's where he recommends bringing magazines and children's stories because they have pictures in them. With pictures you can talk about them, you can ask the language parent what is this, what is that, and they can talk about it. But that's not everything. In total there's 5, I think, activities that he did during his exchanges. These are greetings, past tense, TPR, magazines, children's stories, and then TPRS. So I would say he would do this in this order because it made the most sense. And so any exchange would usually look something like this. First, he would do a greeting. So a greeting is basically, hey, how are you doing? What are you up to? How's X person doing? How's your mom doing? And then he would have his language parent talk to him for about 1 minute at first, because at first you don't know a lot of stuff. Eventually, if you have about 50 hours, then you can maybe do the greetings for 5 minutes or something, maybe 10 minutes. But at first, just focus on short answers only. If they ask, how are you doing? You just say, good, not good, bad, and just repeat that. And as you are building up your vocabulary, you can talk about more stuff. Now, if you are seeing this person again, then you can ask him about the last time that you spoke. Hey, how are they doing now? And you can have a natural conversation. So then he would move on to the past tense.
So go ahead and tell me what you did yesterday after class.
So he would ask the language parent, what did you do yesterday? What did you do last evening? And what did you do this morning? The goal is to have your language parent talk about what they did, and you can just listen. So once they tell you what they did, then it's time for you to talk about what you did last evening, yesterday, last evening, and this morning. Then finally you'll have them retell you what you did. So this way you get the singular first person and the singular second person. So I did this and you did this. But the most important part is, of course, listening. So by having them retell it, you're getting comprehensible input. Now, it's really difficult to talk about what you did, especially at first. So Jeff recommends that you start talking about this stuff after like 30 hours. In order to reach that level, of course, you have to build up your vocabulary, which you do by the magazines and the children's story, which I'll get to in a moment. First, there is TPR. And Jeff explained this as well. This is total physical response, and it's basically acting out stuff like laughing or running and jumping, I think he mentioned in this video. And the reason why this works is because when you get your body involved, movements, it's way easier to remember things. So what you do is you'll have a list of commands, and there's actually a list of commands in this guide that Jeff wrote. You have them in the target language, and then you'll just go over a few. In the guide it says you can do like 50 per exchange, and just have your language parent tell a command, and then you can act it out, of course in the target language. And once you reach 500 commands, you're basically done. Jeff recommends that you start doing this after 20 hours as well. So when you're starting out, from the first hour until like 50 hours in, you are going to use magazines. Pictures are just great because they are context and you can talk about stuff and you can literally see what you're talking about. Or actually you'll have your partner talk about the stuff in the magazines and you'll just listen, but you'll understand it because there's pictures. So actually today I bought a few as well. Jeff recommends doing women fashion, food and travel because these are easier, I guess. In his video he mentioned starting out with colors and clothes, but he says in his guide that this is not really a hard rule that you have to follow. You can start whatever you want as long as you keep it easy. So what you would do is just point at a picture and have your partner tell everything about the picture. What color is this? What is this? What is she doing? Why are they doing this? Now it's really important that you keep asking why, because then your language partner will repeat everything, and repetition is really important in order for you to acquire the words, the vocabulary. And also because it leads to a natural conversation. And the more conversation you have, the more you're listening, the more hours you're getting in, right? Now Jeff recommends that you spend about 1 hour per magazine. And since you'll be doing this from the start until like 50 hours, that would mean like, I don't know, 50 magazines or maybe 100 even. So there's magazines and then there's also children's stories, which are actually even better because children's stories are stories, and stories are the best way to obtain comprehensible input because they're easy and, well, the stories. So after you have done your magazines and you know about 100 to 200 words, you can start using children's stories. Now you're going to do this 3 times. First, you're going to have your language parent just tell you the story. Don't translate the story, just have them tell you the story. And make sure that you know about 90% of what they're saying. After that, they're going to do it again. You close the book, they're going to retell you the story again. And if you understand what the story is about, then you can follow it in your head. So you'll close the book, put it away, and they will tell you the story again. After that, they are going to retell it one more time, but this time they're going to ask you simple questions, just yes and no questions. Now, after 50 hours or so, Jeff says that it's a great idea to use these stories as a way to start natural conversation. So if something happens in a story, like, I don't know, people are driving on a holiday, you can ask them, are you going on holiday this year? Or have you been anywhere that you like, something like that, and you can have a conversation. Now Jeff says that children's stories can get boring as well, and this is where you do the TPRS, which is teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. It's basically making up your own stories. Now when making up your own stories, there's a few steps that Jeff follows every time. So first of all, you're going to choose any picture from a magazine or from the internet, and then you're going to create a backstory. So there's actually an example in this guide. There's this picture right here, and you can create a story about them. So when creating the backstory, you can think about where they live, what their name is, how old they are. Now the next step is to create a conflict. There's always a conflict in any story. They don't have enough money, whatever. When you have this conflict, you can try and find a way to solve this conflict. For example, in this picture, this is a couple. The woman's name is Francine, the man is Bob. They have been dating. They met at a place called Bob's Disco, but there was a problem. Bob wanted to lose weight, so Bob went to the gym every day, but he couldn't lose weight. That's the problem. Now in this story, Francine loved Bob and she told him, I love you the way you are, you're not fat. She told him that 18 times a day, and they had 11 children, and one of them was Bill Gates at the end. So once you have this story, you can actually use it for comprehensible input, and this is what Jeff does. After the story is created, you're going to have your language parent retell you the story. Have them retell the whole story that you just made up with the two of you. Now the third time, they're going to retell you again, but ask you questions. Simple yes and no questions. So it's basically the same as the children's story, but this is a story that the two of you made up, so it's even more fun. Now you can get some extra hours in if you record your stories and listen to them afterwards, after your exchange. And now, after 300 hours of doing this, Jeff went to Egypt and he did the same thing. He did language exchanges, 50 hours a week, which is insane. I'm not sure how he did that, but he managed to do it. And so he did 500 hours, plus the 300 hours that he had already done, which is 800 hours. And so 800 hours is really enough to reach a pretty decent level. Like, I'm not sure, I don't speak Arabic, so I don't know how well his Arabic is, but it seems like it's pretty damn good, and some people in the comments say that it's good. I am truly convinced that this is possible, and I want to try it out myself. I mean, that's why I bought these magazines. I'm going to try this out myself. I'm going to try and record everything, because I think this is really valuable. If this method really works, which I think it does, but I just have to experience for myself, I want to share it. So hopefully you're interested in that as well. If so, let me know, and I'll see you in another video.